right at the beginning of there is a solution. So right now, we're going through the really all the essentials of step one. Step one is learning about the grave nature of alcoholism. If you guys remember, I think last week we looked back on page XVI, top of the page, like 8 lines down. It talks about the things that Bill and the first 100 did to recover. And it wasn't that. They didn't have 12 steps at that time. But the first thing it talks about that he had to do before he got into some of the spiritual aspects of it, I guess, first thing it said that he had to do is he had to learn the grave nature of alcoholism, which he learned from Dr. Silkworth, which is why we have the doctor's opinion in here. And it's basically the doctor's opinion in the first 3 numbered chapters cover all the information that that pertain to step one, as far as this idea of being powerless over alcohol. Or we find on, we're not there yet, but when we get to page 30, we get the directions for step one, which state that we learned that we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we're alcoholics. So we're going to learn what an alcoholic is, according to Alcoholics Anonymous, to determine we're either one or we are not one. And the whole idea behind if you're an alcoholic or not, it boils down really to one word we found in here, and we certainly found through Bill's story, and that's the idea of if you're an alcoholic of the type they're describing here, it is a hopeless condition. That means we are hopeless. And hopeless is defined in the dictionary as no possibility of a solution. These guys found that they tried everything. They could not get over it. And the question is, if that is your case, if you have tried everything to get over your alcoholism and found that you can't, then perhaps you're of this hopeless variety. Furthermore, like we found in the opening remarks, certainly just on the title page, what do they tell us on the title page? This is what Alcoholics Anonymous is for. It's not about the problem. It's about the solution, right? They're telling us point blank, Alcoholics Anonymous is the story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism. We're going to show you how we got over it. If you're one of us, we'll show you how we did it. And it seems we find that rarely does anyone fail to recover if they thoroughly follow what we did, right? Thoroughly following their path. So, interesting thing I was thinking about this morning, I think that it was brought to my attention, maybe, I don't know if it was last week or the week before. I mean, Phil was having a little discussion. I don't remember if it was before or after the meeting. I got a terrible memory about these things, but I remember what he said. And he said that he heard someone state something at a meeting, and they said, one thing that we learned in the doctor's opinion is we have an abnormal reaction to alcohol. Right, we have an abnormal reaction. When they talk about an abnormal reaction to alcohol, what they're talking about is that the physical aspect, the physical craving that we have, the allergy, that when we put alcohol in our system, we have an allergic reaction which manifests itself with a physical craving for more and more and more. And that's why when we go out and try to control the amount we take, a few drinks tonight, and you end up having a lot more than you intend to, that's an abnormal reaction. Abnormal is simply defined as you're experiencing something that the majority does not. That's abnormal. A normal reaction is what the majority of people experience. Abnormal is something that the majority of people don't experience. The majority of people who drink, and they talk about it in the doctor thing, most people drink because they like the feeling of it. It's a social lubricant, always has been for a long time. People like the feeling. They even like what the doctor talked about in that cycle. They like the ease and comfort that comes at once from a couple or maybe a few drinks. That's normal, okay? But what doesn't happen to these non-alcoholic types is once they get to that point where they have that ease and comfort, they're good. They don't want any more, right? It's kind of like if you eat a steak, man, you're hungry, even if you're starving, and it's just one of the best steaks you'd ever see. You cut it, oh, that's fantastic. Okay, so you got a 16-ounce steak in front of you. You probably aren't going to order 4 or 5 more afterwards and just keep stuffing yourself until you throw up all over the place, right? You just like it and you're enjoying it. There's going to be a point when you're not going to enjoy it anymore. And that's when your body says, I've had enough. Well, normal people, when they take alcohol, they will drink it, and there'll be a point when their body says, oh, you've had enough. It might be that they start feeling the loss of control. They start feeling this dizzy feeling. They feel out of control. They might start feeling like throwing up. It's poison at some point to your body. And, that's what's going to happen with us. The more that we get in, the more in control we feel, the more we want to have. Abnormal reaction. So we learn that, we cover that a lot, but really when we're talking about recovering, we're not recovering from that condition. Okay. That allergy will stay with an alcoholic, as far as we know, according to the book, that stays with us forever. So the whole point is, back to what the doctor said, is the only thing we have to offer is absolute abstinence. Just can't have it. If you don't put the allergen in your system, you'll never have an allergic reaction. Problem with that is that we can't stay quit if you're an alcoholic. Stay quit for a period of time, but can't stay that way when we honestly want to. And really what that is the second part of what Phil said. Is while we do have an abnormal reaction to alcohol, the solution of that would be what? Don't drink. Sober. If that was our problem, sober would be our solution. I believe probably, my guess would be everybody in here is sober right now. My question would be, well, what the hell are you doing here? You already got your solution. You're sober. Why are you here? Right? It's not the problem. The problem is not about our abnormal reaction to alcohol. The problem is why can't we quit and stay quit? And what that contends with is the second part is we have an abnormal reaction to alcohol, and we also have an equally abnormal reaction to sobriety. Never heard that one before. That struck me. I started thinking about that. We have an abnormal reaction to sobriety. So while we're sober here, if you're an alcoholic and you're not recovered, got an abnormal reaction to being sober. Abnormal meaning most people don't experience what we experience when we're sober. The majority of people when they're sober get along with their day just fine. They can get along with or without alcohol, no problem. So what's the abnormal reaction that we have to sobriety? Back to the doctor's opinion. When we're sober, we get restless, irritable, and discontent. And we just start getting miserable. And we just start thinking about the ease and comfort we're going to get from a few drinks. And the longer we stay away from it, the more miserable we get and the more we need it. Normal people don't experience that. And that's what we're trying to recover from. We're trying to recover from our abnormal reaction to sobriety. That's why sobriety isn't enough. It's a starting point. But the problem for us is that when we're sober, it's a problem. It's a problem for us when we're sober. So we need to learn how to be able to get along sober and be happy at the same time. And that's what we recover from. The condition that they say we get in the second step, they talk about us being, well, these have been turned around, restored to sanity. That insane thinking that tells us it's okay after we've quit for a long time to pick up that drink and put it to our mouth and take the drink. It makes no sense with everything that we have to lose to pick it up again. Yet we do. That is insane. Right? That is not normal sound thinking. Right? So what drives us? I guess if you really dig it, what drives us to picking that up? What is the thinking? And that's what we're going to be discussing, especially in these next two chapters, chapter 2 and 3. What is the thinking that precedes that first drink? When we so desperately have quit, want to stay quit, why would we pick it up again? What is wrong with our thinking? What is the insanity about? Well, we'll get into what it's about, but more importantly is that to understand, that is what we are trying to recover from, so that we don't have that insane thinking. I'll always be an alcoholic, but for me, being recovered, for alcohol for me, it's poisonous for me. I know that. I don't ever forget it. I don't need to shun it. I don't need to stay away from it. I don't need to not be around people who drink or not being able to go into a bar. It doesn't matter to me, honestly. It does not matter. It makes no difference for me. I'm not in any danger of picking that up because that insanity has been lifted from me. And as long as we continue to do things, we stay in that condition. So that's what we're recovering from. You're not recovering from drinking, which would just be sober. We're trying to figure out how to be sober and not have an abnormal reaction to being sober. Make sense? That's what we're here for. Okay, so let's get on to chapter 2. There is a solution starting on page 17. And starts out here stating, we of Alcoholics Anonymous. Who is we of Alcoholics Anonymous? I think we covered that earlier. The authors, more than 100 men and women, okay? They say that they've known thousands of men who were once just as hopeless as Bill. That's alcoholic. When you see that word hopeless, that's what they're talking about, the hopeless variety. They were just as hopeless as Bill. And guess what? They point blank state nearly every single one of them have recovered from that condition. They have solved the drinking problem. We are average Americans, all sections of this country, many of its occupations are represented, as well as many political, economic, social, and religious backgrounds. We are people who normally would not mix, but there exists a fellowship among us, a friendliness and an understanding which is indescribably wonderful. Okay, so what we're going to start talking about in the rest of this paragraph is we're going to start talking about the second, I guess I look at it as the second AA. They tell us Alcoholics Anonymous on the title page. That's this book. Because when they wrote it, there was no fellowship called Alcoholics Anonymous. Even when they wrote it, when they had 100, it was not called Alcoholics Anonymous. The only Alcoholics Anonymous the world knew was this book. Now we're going to learn about the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. Okay, and they're telling us right out of the gate that we come from all sorts of different backgrounds. We're very different people, and they say we're people who normally wouldn't mix, in normal settings. We're very, very different. But it goes on to say that that there is an understanding, is the word I want to key in on, which is indescribably wonderful. And the understanding, this is about the problem. Okay, this is about the problem. We all have a common peril, right? And that's the hopelessness of alcoholism. That's what we all have in common. We all have that allergic reaction. It says, we're like the passengers of a great liner the moment after rescue from shipwreck, when camaraderie, joyousness, and democracy pervade the vessel from steerage to captain's table. So we understand the steerage section, from what I understand back then in the 30s, before we had airplanes taking us around. If you wanted to go overseas, it's by ship. Everybody traveled by ship. So they had different classes of tickets that you could buy on a ship. The steerage is like down in the very lower bowels of the ship. And then you might have a 5th class ticket, which is up a little more, and then a 4th class and 3rd. And then you get all the way up to the 1st class tickets. These are the guys who, that are on, but they're not the guys actually on the top. There's still a select class of the 1st class that is called those that get invited to what's called the captain's table, to eat dinner with the captain. And these are not just people who have money, but apparently that you've got to be the right class of people. So they're talking that once, if you just think about the Titanic, that's what I think of when it went down, and some of the people were rescued. Many died, but some of them were rescued. They were from all sorts of different sections of the ship. But buddy, when they got brought to land, they all had that one thing in common, that common peril. Doesn't matter how much money you had or what your social standing was, every one of them froze their ass off in that water, and they all almost died exactly the same, because we're all human. So they escaped that peril. And that's what they're saying that we have in common. But unlike the ship's passengers, however, our joy in escape from disaster does not subside as we go our individual ways. And I would underline this. The feeling of having shared in a common peril, that is one element in the powerful cement which binds us. But that in itself would never have held us together as we are now joined. So we're different. Again, these guys get to land, they're all happy. We all shared this thing together, and great, but we all kind of go our individual ways, and that's that. But here they're saying that common peril, that's only one thing that binds us. So when you sit around AA meetings, people start getting into talking about their war stories and how they drank and all the trouble they got into, and everybody shares it. That's a common peril that they're talking about. All right. That's not what holds us together, though. That is not the deal. The next sentence I would underline and highlight says, the tremendous fact for every one of us is that we have discovered a common solution. See, our fellowship grows up around the solution, not the common peril. It's the common solution. We have a way out, which we can absolutely agree, and upon which we can join in brotherly and harmonious actions. We all can absolutely agree that we have one way out. At least they did then. There was one solution. And that they joined together in brotherly and harmonious action. What do you think they mean by that? About working with other people, right? Working together and coming up with ideas of how we can better present this to other people. That's the common solution. And this is the great news this book carries to those who suffer from alcoholism. Is a solution. An illness of this sort, and we have come to believe it an illness, involves those about us in a way no other human sickness can. Again, they describe alcoholism as an illness in this book over and over. You only hear the word disease once when they talk about spiritual disease. And here they said it twice. So an illness of this sort, and by the way, we do believe in an illness. That tells me that if they said, well, we do come to believe in an illness, they must know what an illness means. Now, what did they say they suffered from? A seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. The definition of an illness, a condition that prevents the normal functioning of the mind and or body. Kind of fits, doesn't it? They knew what they were talking about. If a person has cancer, all are sorry for him and no one is angry or hurt, but not so with the alcoholic illness. For with it, there goes annihilation of all things worthwhile in life. It engulfs all whose lives touch the sufferers. It brings misunderstanding, fierce resentment, financial insecurity, disgusted friends and employers, warped lives of blameless children, sad wives and parents, and anyone can increase this list. Would underline that we hope this volume will, one, inform, and two, comfort those who are or who may be affected. There are many. They hope this book will comfort and inform those who have been affected by the alcoholic. Does that not mean that this book is also for the people who are affected by the alcoholic? This book is not just for the alcoholic. If they're hoping this will inform them, they're hoping they get a hold of it so that they can be informed and comforted. Highly competent psychiatrists who have dealt with us have found it sometimes impossible to persuade an alcoholic to discuss the situation without reservation. Strangely enough, wise parents and intimate friends usually find us even more unapproachable than the psychiatrist or the doctor. But the ex-problem drinker, that is code word for somebody who is recovered, the ex-problem drinker who has, one, found this solution. That means he has recovered. He's found the solution. And also who is properly armed with facts about himself, 1 and 2, right? That person can generally win the entire confidence of another alcoholic in a few hours. Anybody ever go to a psychologist or psychiatrist before coming to AA? I mean, I did. And when anybody go for like more than a year? I did. I didn't find a solution there. Hours and hours. And it reinforced what they're saying here. Yet when I got with my mentor and he started explaining this book, it didn't take me long to, one, know that he knew what he was talking about. He had experienced this recovery thing. And we had a connection that I could never get with somebody who was non-alcoholic. And this description they have here, and they put it all in italics, these are the things you're going to want to look for as qualifications for a mentor if you're new. You want somebody who's recovered, who knows this solution in this book, knows this book and the directions that contain within it. And he's properly armed with facts about himself. Right? He knows what an alcoholic is. He knows his job as a mentor is to do nothing but to teach this book. That's the person that can win our confidence. And it says in just a few hours. And it says, until such an understanding is reached, little or nothing can be accomplished. In years of psychology and even psychiatrists, for me, little to nothing was accomplished, certainly to do with my addiction. Little enough for me. That backs that statement up. That the man who is making the approach, here we go back into that. Who approaches who? Does the newcomer come up to you, or do we go up to the newcomer? The man who is making the approach, he's had the same difficulty. He obviously knows what he's talking about, that his whole deportment shouts at the new prospect that he is a man with a real answer, that has no attitude of holier than thou, nothing whatever, except a sincere desire to be helpful. That there are no fees to pay, no axes to grind, no people to please, no lectures to be endured. These are the conditions we have found most effective. After such an approach, many take up their beds and walk again. So it's us who are recovered, who have gotten well, right, been returned to a normal state of health, that are reaching out to the person who is still sick. Well, isn't that normally how it is with any other sickness? You're well, you say, man, my buddy, he just got diagnosed with cancer. Well, I hope if he needs anything, he gives me a call. I ain't gonna call him. We don't do that, right? We reach out, see if there's anything we can do. That's no different with this. None of us makes a sole vocation of this work. nor do we think its effectiveness would be increased if we did. I would underline though, we feel that the elimination of drinking is but a beginning. I go back to that statement often as we go through this book. Elimination of drinking, again, is code word for sober. Elimination of drinking. It's just a beginning. And if you've done nothing else in AA other than go to meetings and don't drink, don't they even say that in meetings? Just don't drink and go to meetings. Well, you will make a beginning. And if that's all you keep doing, you may make a really long beginning. But I tell you what, based on what the doctor says, if that's all that you do is have the elimination of drinking, what do they say? I think on 121, they say that they use a different word for elimination of drinking. But they say that it is about one step away from a highly strained and abnormal condition. You're still miserable. You are still thinking about that. We still want that ease and comfort. We don't want the consequences, but we want it because we get so freaking miserable. That's why it's just a beginning. We don't stay that way. And it can become very alluring too, especially you guys hear about the pink cloud. Sometimes they talk about in AA that guys are on, and a lot of times they associate it with like the first year of sobriety because things just start feeling great. You go to these meetings, you hear wonderful things, and you start feeling great. They call it a pink cloud in AA because they caught on to one thing. It always goes away. It always, they say the first year is a gift because they know what comes after that, right? So there's some truth to it. Fact of the matter is we have to do something. We have to do something. And this is what it says. That's just a beginning, but a much more important demonstration of our principles lies before us in our respective homes, in our occupations, and in our affairs. That sounds like everything we do. We must demonstrate our principles. All of us spend much of our spare time in the sort of effort we're going to describe. A few are even fortunate enough to be so situated that they can give nearly all their time to the work. If we keep on the way we are going, there's little doubt that much good will result, but the surface of the problem would hardly be scratched. Those of us who live in large cities are overcome by the reflection that close by hundreds are dropping into oblivion every day. Many could recover if they had the opportunity we have enjoyed. How then shall we present that which has been so freely given us? This is in the chapter, There is a Solution. All they're talking about right now is helping others, aren't they? They ain't even talking about your condition. We're talking about the helping others right from the beginning. So how do we give away what has been so freely given us? Well, we have concluded to publish an anonymous volume. That's this book. That's how they're going to give it away. And in this book, they're going to set forth the problem as we see it. We shall also bring to the task our combined experience and knowledge. So they're going to tell us about the problem as they see it. That again is the first 3 chapters in the doctor's opinion. And then they're going to bring their experience and their knowledge of what they've learned and their experience. And this is where we separate the idea of many other books that may be textbooks that have directions. It's not based on theory. It's not based on this is what we think you should do. Even as a doctor, this is not based on a doctor's opinion. All that told us is that we're hopeless. They didn't give us any solution in there. They just told us that you're hopeless as far as we're concerned, right? But this is based on experience. In other words, we don't say in AA, and we talked about it at the beginning, we don't say, this is what you need to do if you want to recover. You got to do. It's not the case. The way it's presented, I was just like you. I'm going to tell you about my experiences, and you're going to say, boy, this guy really knows what he's talking about with alcohol. And you know what? I was down at my low. It about killed me. And you know what? I don't feel that way anymore. Number one, I don't drink anymore, but 2, I don't feel the way I used to. I mean, life is great. And if you're interested, if you don't have a solution, I'll show you what I did. Because what even the authors state that they found it to be rare for you to fail to have the same thing happen to you if you did what I did. If you're interested, I'll show you what I did. And that's where, when we're going to show them what we did, what did we do? It better just be this. Because anything outside of this is not Alcoholics Anonymous. This book is Alcoholics Anonymous. This book on page 19, which I believe we'll see, or I'm sorry, no, it's on page 29, will tell us that clear-cut directions are given showing how we recovered. Top of page 29. Clear-cut directions are in here showing how we recovered. That's what we teach. The clear-cut directions in here. Nothing more. becomes very dangerous when we start teaching something different. Because then if we don't like it, we go to another guy, well, no, it doesn't say that in here. Somebody will give you their opinion. So we don't want opinions. All we want to do is teach them exactly what happened to us, exactly the way it happened. Where are we at here? So that's what the book's for. See, the book doesn't change. Didn't they say that there's been no radical changes made in it? Showing you exactly what we did. Nothing's changed. It still works. And they said, with that, this should suggest a useful program for anyone concerned with a drinking problem. Of necessity, there will have to be discussion of matters medical, psychiatric, social, and religious. We are aware that these matters are, from their very nature, controversial. Nothing would please us so much as to write a book which would contain no bias for contention or argument. We shall do our utmost to achieve that ideal. Most of us sense that real tolerance of other people's shortcomings and their viewpoints, and a respect for their opinions, are attitudes which make us more useful to others. But underline this statement: our very lives as ex-problem drinkers depend on our constant thought of others and how we may help meet their needs. So if I'm an ex-problem drinker and I'm recovered, my very life depends on passing this message. They're making that very clear there. My life is dependent on it. Just like the newcomer's life, if he's an alcoholic, his life is dependent on getting a spiritual experience, as far as we're concerned. If they don't have that happen, they're probably going to die of that condition. Well, our very lives as being recovered, it's still hanging in the balance. Because remember, we have an abnormal reaction to sobriety that will lead us back to alcohol. So the way out of it, there is a solution. The chapter, what are we talking about? Helping other people. That's it. How important does that sound like that is? I talk about that a lot. They talk about that a lot in here. I mean, that is like there's more information in the first portion of this book in the directions about working with other people than about anything. Then even about everything we're going to learn about alcoholism, there's more information and more emphasis on helping other people. And yet, in contemporary AA, I have seen, and I have been guilty of being a part of it before I learned this information, that it's not something I did very often, working with somebody or sponsoring somebody. And it seemed very convenient to say, well, I'm willing. If somebody asked me, till that happens, yeah, I'm here. Right? I got a solution I could save this guy's life, but if he doesn't answer, I'm not going to do it. I didn't know that my very life was hanging in the balance because of that. And at minimum, my happiness, at least in the short run, is contingent on it. And I wondered how I could be sober for so many years and yet never have, when you read the promises, they sounded like extravagant promises to me. I never quite felt that way. I felt life's better, but I never felt like I really grasped what these guys were talking about. I never had that true sense of happiness in and through me all the time. And it's no wonder I didn't have it, because I wasn't doing what I had to do. It wasn't until I started teaching this. You learn this information if you're recovered. My God, please understand the importance of passing this on. Usually in the beginning of the meeting, we ask if anybody's got less than 6 months. And somebody raises their hand, that should be the first thing anybody in here that's recovered. So I'm going to talk to that guy after the meeting. You got anybody? What do you think of what you heard? Are you working with anybody? Are you interested in working with somebody? That's it. And then leave it in their hands. We don't push them, but that's what we're here for. That's what we're here for. All right, enough on that rant. You may already have asked yourself why it is that all of us became so very ill from drinking. Doubtless you're curious to discover how and why, in the face of expert opinion to the contrary, we have recovered from a hopeless condition of mind and body. If you're an alcoholic who wants to get over it, you may already be asking, well, what do I have to do? Well, guess what? It is the purpose of this book to answer such questions with specificity. Specifically. We're going to get specific answers to what do I have to do? That's what the book's for. So we shall tell you what we have done. Before going into a detailed discussion, it may be well to summarize some points as we see them. How many times people have said to us, I can take it or leave it alone. Why can't he? Why don't you drink like a gentleman or just quit? That fellow can't handle his liquor. Why don't you try beer and wine? Lay off the hard stuff. His willpower must be weak. He could stop if he wanted to. How many of us said that to ourselves? He could stop if he wanted to. She's such a sweet girl. I should think he'd stop for her sake. The doctor told him if he ever drank again, it's going to kill him. But there he is, all lit up again. Now, these are commonplace observation on drinkers, which we hear all the time by non-alcoholics. And it says behind them is a world of ignorance and misunderstanding. Misunderstanding of alcoholism. That's what the book's for. I mean, we have a chapter just to employers. We have a chapter to wives or anyone touched by blood or affection of the alcoholic, so they can learn this condition because of this misunderstanding. What? He must not love me. He went out and drank again. I'm going to leave him when I'm taking the kids and I'm done with him. He made his choice. I didn't make the choice. I told him if he drank again, I'm leaving. He drank. He obviously knew what was going to happen and he didn't care. You think it might be important for them to understand that we don't reflect on the consequences sometimes? It doesn't make an excuse for them, but it certainly is an explanation that makes sense. Because in other times, you can ask just about any one of those people and ask, do you really think he doesn't love you? Aside of drinking, do you really think that? Most of them would agree that that's probably not the case, but it makes no sense. Why would you drink again when I told you I'm leaving you if you do? That means that's more important. That's common sense. That's sane thinking. We do not have sane thinking. We see these expressions refer to people whose reactions are very different than ours. Moderate drinkers have little trouble giving up liquor entirely if they have a good reason for it. It's a good place for even a newcomer to determine whether they're an alcoholic or not, is based on that one question. You're a moderate drinker if you have little trouble giving it up entirely, if you have a really good reason. You might really enjoy your drinking, but if a doctor says you're going to die, or perhaps you really love your family and your spouses are going to leave you, that may be a pretty good reason to give it up, right? And they have little trouble doing it if they really need to. Is that you? That's the question. Then we have a certain type of hard drinker. Okay, he may have the habit badly enough to gradually impair him physically and mentally. It may cause him to die a few years before his time. However, if a sufficiently strong reason, such as ill health, falling in love, change of environment, or the warning of a doctor becomes operative, this man can also, one, he can stop, and or two, he can moderate. Although he may find it difficult and troublesome and may even need some medical attention. But even a hard drinker can do that, right? Many of us and many people in society can very easily confuse a hard drinker with an alcoholic. Well, of course, my uncle's an alcoholic. He drinks every day. Also, drinks in the morning. My God, it's always got a drink in his hand. Does not make them an alcoholic. There are hard drinkers out there. My father-in-law is actually a hard drinker. And he found it for a medical reason imperative for him to quit. And he did in his 60s. And everybody would swear this guy to be an alcoholic. Quit. Didn't want to die. He was able to do it. That's somebody who is not an alcoholic. So now the question is, what about the real alcoholic? He may start off as a moderate drinker, and he may or may not become a continuous hard drinker. He may or may not become a continuous hard drinker. I was not a continuous hard drinker. I stopped drinking when I was 25. And I wasn't at that point a continuous hard drinker. And that made me really confused when I went to meetings and heard about these continuous hard drinkers all the time, talking about their stories. And no, that wasn't me. And what they must be describing is that they're an alcoholic, because I'm sitting at this first step table and they're talking about what an alcoholic is. And then they're describing themselves as an alcoholic by their continuous hard drinking and all the consequences they suffer, which is not what makes us an alcoholic. And it says right here, you may or may not cross that stage of being a continuous hard drinker. So we're looking at the real alcoholic, but at some stage in his drinking career, this is what makes the difference. He begins to lose all control of his liquor consumption once he starts. The allergic reaction. I can't control the amount I take at some point. Here's a fellow who's been puzzling you, especially in his lack of control. He does absurd, incredible, tragic things while drinking. He's a real Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. He's seldom mildly intoxicated. He's always more or less insanely drunk. His disposition while drinking resembles his normal nature but little. He may be one of the finest fellows in the world, yet let him drink for a day. And he frequently becomes disgustingly, even dangerously antisocial. He's a positive genius for getting drunk at exactly the wrong moment, particularly when some important decision must be made or an engagement kept. It's like maybe his family. He's often perfectly sensible and well-balanced concerning everything except liquor. But in that respect, he's incredibly dishonest and selfish. Isn't that a strange way of describing the person? He's dishonest and he's selfish. That's how they're explaining his nature. We're going to learn a little bit more about that selfishness later on. He often possesses special abilities, skills, and aptitudes, and has a promising career ahead of him. Most alcoholics are pretty successful, or certainly potentially very successful people. He uses his gifts to build up a bright outlook for his family and himself, and then pulls the structure down on his head with a senseless series of sprees. He's a fellow who goes to bed so intoxicated he ought to sleep the clock around. Yet, early next morning, he searches madly for the bottle he misplaced the night before. If he can afford it, he may have liquor concealed all over the house to be certain no one gets his entire supply away from him and throw it down the waste pipe. And keep in mind, this again is not just about alcohol. It can be drugs or anything else as well. I mean, myself, I also had an addiction to cocaine, and my wife did it too. I wasn't afraid of her pouring it down the waste pipe. I was afraid of her putting that up her nose, so I would hide it. You know, the point is, I didn't want anybody to get that in which that gave me ease and comfort. I didn't want any of it taken away from me. I was very selfish in that regard. As matters grow worse, he begins to use a combination of high-power sedative and liquor to quiet his nerves so he can go to work. Then comes the day when he simply cannot make it and gets drunk all over again. Perhaps he goes to a doctor who gives him morphine or some sedative with which to taper off. Then he begins to appear at hospitals and treatment centers, sanitariums. This is by no means a comprehensive picture of the true alcoholic. This is by no means a comprehensive picture of the true alcoholic, as our behavior patterns vary. But this description should identify him roughly. Question is, why does he behave like this? If hundreds of experiences have shown him that one drink means another debacle with all its attendant suffering and humiliation, why is it that he takes the one drink? Forget about the 15. Why does he take the one? Why can't he stay on the water wagon? What has become of his common sense and what has become of his willpower that he still sometimes displays with other respects, other areas of his life? Perhaps there will never be a full answer to these questions. Opinions vary considerably as to why the alcoholic reacts differently from normal people, meaning abnormal. We're not sure why. Once a certain point is reached, little can be done for him. Hopeless. Once that point is reached. It is not the point when he's lost 3 wives or crashed 5 cars. It's the point when he loses control over the amount that he takes, when he starts drinking. Doesn't matter how old you are, how long you've been drinking, whatever. That is when little can be done for him. And didn't we just read that on page 18? Until such an understanding is reached, little or nothing can be accomplished, right? Little can be done for him. We cannot answer the riddle. We know that while the alcoholic keeps away from drink, that would mean while he's sober, as he may do for months or even years. He reacts much like other men, but we're equally positive that once he takes any alcohol, whatever, in his system, something happens, both in his bodily and mental sense, which makes it virtually impossible for him to stop. The experience of any alcoholic will abundantly confirm this. When you're talking with a newcomer, certainly in the first conversation, we're going to learn this when we get to the later parts of the book. One of the first things you do is find out whether he wants to quit. But the next thing you do is you need to let him understand that you understand the drinking game. And this is when our stories or our war stories can come in handy if we use them properly. And it's not about I wrecked the car or whatever. It's about give them the examples of how you tried to stop and had every reason to stop, and you tried to quit and you couldn't, and you could not figure out why. Why is it? Why is it? Why is it? Because if you start describing that, if you're dealing with another alcoholic, he's going to understand that. Believe me, when I start going through the doctor's opinion, talk about this, I don't know if any of you guys look around, but there's a lot of people. Yeah, we understand that. We understand that. There's not one person, well, that's not me. You know, yeah, I was going to lose my wife or I was going to die, the doctor said, but I had a good reason for picking it up. Tell me what it was. Tell me what it was. There's never a good excuse. We just don't know why. And most of us just resort to the fact that either I was not on guard, I forgot that I was quitting, or my willpower is just weak and I got to try harder. But really, we don't know, right? Explain that to them, because what you're going to start explaining to them is you do know why. You do know why. And they'll listen to it. They'll be more open and receptive to that if you can explain your own experience. That's when our experiences come into in handy. That's why it says the experience of any alcoholic will abundantly confirm this. These observations would be academic and pointless if our friend never took the first drink, thereby setting that terrible cycle in motion. Therefore, underline the main problem of the alcoholic centers in his mind rather than his body. We do have a condition of the mind and body. The main problem is in our mind, not our body, because our mind is what fails us and we pick up the first one. After we pick up the first one, we have the allergic reaction. We'll never have the allergic reaction if we don't pick up the first one. And the only thing that stops us from picking up that first one is not the body. It is the mind. It's the mind. It says if you ask him why he started on that last bender, the chances are he's going to offer you any of 100 alibis. Sometimes these excuses have a certain plausibility, but none of them really make sense in the light of the havoc an alcoholic's drinking bout creates. They sound like the philosophy of a man who, having a headache, beats himself on the head with a hammer so he can't feel the ache. If you draw this fallacious reasoning to the attention of the alcoholic, he will laugh it off or become irritated and refuse to talk. But once in a while, he might tell you the truth. And the truth, strange to say, is usually he has no more idea why he took that first drink than you have. No idea. Some drinkers have excuses which they are satisfied part of the time, but in their hearts, they really don't know why they do it. And once this malady has a real hold, they are a baffled lot. But underline, there is the obsession. Where is the obsession in the body or the mind? Obsession's in the mind. We have an obsession of the mind. There's the obsession that somehow, someday, they're going to beat the game. But they often suspect they're down for a count. How true this is, few realize in the vague way their families and friends sense that these drinkers are abnormal. But everybody hopefully awaits the day when the sufferer will rouse himself from his lethargy and his power of will. I'm going to finish one last paragraph. The tragic truth is that if the man is a real alcoholic, that happy day may not arrive. He has lost control. Underline this. At a certain point, this is where the line is of crossing over to an alcoholic. At a certain point in the drinking career of every alcoholic, all of us, he passes into a state where the most powerful desire to stop is of absolutely no avail. Okay, willpower cannot do it at a certain point. It's a different point in my experience, and we're going to see in here with all of us. Some of us quit very. Bill was only in his 30s, by the way. Most people think these were really old guys and drank for 50 years. Bill wasn't. The AA number one, right? But there's a point when we cross that line, when no matter how bad we want to stop, we can't. And here's the thing. It says this tragic situation has already arrived in practically every case long before it's suspected, meaning you've already crossed that line by the time you're aware. Well, how would you know when you cross that line that I can't stop? You would have to try to stop, right? You try to stop, I find I can't. My God, I can't. Well, what they're saying here is not only can't you, but that like didn't just happen. You crossed that line a long time ago. You just never tried to stop to find out. You're way past it. It's not like, oh gee, I found out I'm pre-diabetic. I can turn this ship around. Once you find you can't stop, it says in almost every case you pass that line a long time ago into that state of hopelessness. From there, we'll stop.